Good evening, Boston Unity Group. Welcome to February 2021. It is a pleasure to be here again. Tonight's talk is going to be a superb talk with Adam talking about collaboration with artists and non-artists. Before we get started, hi, I'm Chris. I'm one of the organisers, and with me tonight are Elliot and Graham. Wave. Hello. There we go. We're waving at you guys. I know you can't see us. Well, you can see us. We can't see you. But anyway, so we have Adam talking tonight, and we have announcements. I do not have any.
I don't know. Yeah. I should have looked at the events channel before jumping in.
Yeah, I rushed in unprepared this week. We do have the events channel that we speak of is a really good events channel. It's on the Boston Game Dev Slack, which we will type the link to in chat in a moment. And anyone in the area, or not in the area, but who wants to be part of our community, you can come and join us there. We list all of the upcoming events on that Slack channel, as well as host a bunch of chat and conversation, discussion, and it's a great place to meet anybody really in the Boston area who's doing stuff with games, or stuff with Unity, or stuff with Unreal, or stuff with art and music. I think we've got channels for pretty much everything on there now, right? So
pretty much everything.
Yeah, and yeah, we host that with obviously our friends at Boston Indies and Game Audio Boston, and there's also
Mooney Games Boston.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Boston Postmortem.
That's the one I was thinking of as well. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a shared Slack for all of those groups.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sweet. I will join that.
Yeah, you're welcome to join us, Adam. It'd be lovely to have you.
Basically a New England Slack.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, we use the Boston term pretty loosely. Yeah. There's people from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, obviously. Yeah.
And we do also have, there is a Discord too that people go to as well. I think there's a couple of Discords and things. I don't have the details on the top of my head, but we'll probably find it and put it into chat.
Yeah, so for events, let's see. So March 2nd, Boston Postmortem has Rohit talking about lessons he learned making his soon-to-be-released indie platformer 9. That's this is all in the Hash Events channel in the Slack. Then on Friday, there is an event at Northeastern on the future of games for health, which sounds pretty interesting. And yeah, that's all I see so far.
Awesome.
But definitely keep an eye on there for new events that crop up.
Excellent. And if you stick with us to the end of the stream tonight, we have a giveaway again for some JetBrains Rider licenses. We will be doing a question and answer fun session at the end, so you got to stay to the end, kids. Okay. So without any ado, Adam, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here this month, and take it away.
All right. Let me start by saying, hey, Pat Kemp in the chat. Okay.
Hi, Pat. Hi, coworker.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Adam. I usually like to start these things with just a little bit of background about myself, so you sort of know where I'm coming from. I've been making games since 2004. I am self-taught as far as game art goes. I went to a fine art school, Maine College of Art. So I'm a formerly trained artist, but in the early aughts, YouTube didn't exist and stuff like that. So I am self-taught through trial and error, which is awful. And it took a long time to do that. So I am also passionate about education because of that. I taught at the college level for 7.5 years as well. But one of the benefits of learning the way I did, and actually also, just to back up, self-taught, and I didn't realize that people specialized. So I didn't realize people were just painters or modelers or animators. I thought if you were a game artist, you had to do everything. And so I taught myself how to do all that stuff. And the benefit, though, is that I learn to really appreciate how one thing flows into the next thing, how choices you make when you're doing concept art will affect how you have to rig something, or how you model something changes how you approach when you animate it. And so I have this sort of holistic view of game art, and I think that's that maybe will come across with my comments about collaboration as well. So when Graham asked me if I wanted to give this talk, I was very, very excited because this was back in like maybe October. And I was like, oh, sweet. Okay, cool. The game I'm working on right now is going to be announced in January, and I'll be able to talk about that. And then for very good game development reasons, it was not announced. And so I asked, I'm part of a small indie dev Discord, and I said, like, I have to give this talk, and I don't know what I'm going to talk about. What should I talk about? And one of the programmers on it said, I never know how much feedback to give when I'm giving feedback to an artist. And I also just like if an artist is asking for like a system to be changed to make way for a certain kind of art, I don't know if I should do it or not. And I guess just generally, I can work with artists, but I don't really know how to work with artists. And I thought, like, okay, sweet. I can definitely talk about that. Because that is what I do. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this topic, I think. And I think the best way for me to do that is to sort of just go over my whole standard process of starting a project, first steps on those projects, because it's very much about, it's usually, in fact, now that when I'm thinking about it, the last time an art director got in touch with me for a job was 2007. So it's usually a programmer or a designer. And the way I approach it is really just to facilitate communication between me and someone of a different discipline. So, and I'm going to share my screen here. Actually, let me open an image first so we have something to look at. Okay. And then here we go. Oh, wait. There we go. So usually someone, I timed this terribly. I still have preamble. Okay. Usually someone gets in touch with me. They send me an email. They say, hey, so-and-so said you're good to work with. We have this project. Do you want to help out on it? And I basically start every project with just asking questions. Really, I think I maybe start every relationship I have with asking questions. I like to know about things and people. So these are the sort of standard questions that I ask, and I'll go through each one. To start off, obviously, is there a prototype I could try? Or barring that video screenshots, let's just see where things are now. And also let's just, see how various bits interact with one another. Related to that, what are the nouns and verbs of gameplay? So, games have players perform actions in service of achieving, a goal. Stuff is maybe pushing against them. What are those things? It's important to know those things because the art style is going to be built around that. And I actually, more than art style, I prefer a different phrase or a different term. I like visual language. I think it's a little bit more articulate. So just like gameplay has nouns and verbs, art has nouns and verbs, and those nouns and verbs form the visual language. And usually the nouns and verbs of both design and of art, they're often one-to-one, right? Okay, I'm going to talk more about that later, so I'm not going to get bogged down.
It's go back to the gallery view for a minute. Let's see if we are back in business. Come on, we can do this.
Ah, nice.
We back?
That scene from Jurassic Park where like he calls him and he's like, Mr. Hammond, the lights or the phones are working.
Is this the point where we get the clever girl Velociraptor comes in and eats us all?
Yeah. Samuel
the
Jackson's
irony.
arm falls on Adam's shoulder.
Oh! Oh my goodness me. It's working. Alright, great. Marvellous. I'm so sorry for the interruption, everybody. There is something kooky with my graphics card. I don't know.
Okay. Pick it back up?
You can pick it back up. Sorry. Over to you, Adam.
Okay. I will share my screen again. Okay. So, I forget where I stopped. I'll start at schedule. So is there a set schedule? This is a really important question, not only because I want to know how working on this how much time how much of my time this project is going to take, but also because going back to the holistic view I have of development, an art style that has to fit in a dev cycle of 6 months is I'm going to approach that a lot differently than if I have 10 months or 14 or 18 or 24, right? So that's a really important one. Next question. What inspired this game? I think about the story of Miyamoto saying that running around in forests as a boy is what inspired Zelda. And I think that, looking at a video is like one way to get information about, what this game is supposed to be. But, some inspiration, even if the game is not like about the inspiration, knowing the inspiration allows me to be in the right frame of mind and sort of like tap into this sort of, I don't know, the gestalt of like the emotional experience, maybe, or at least the emotional experience that inspired the game. I think it's like just a good thing to have in my brain as I'm working, because it'll help achieve a certain understanding, I think, between me and the designer. That sort of flows into the next question. What's the emotional tone of the game? So this really affects, a game that's supposed to be, I don't know, whimsical and upbeat and hopeful. Those adjectives are going to have different visual decisions tied to them. I'm going to approach, figuring out a color palette and motifs and form and stuff like that differently than if, a game is supposed to feel somber or, I don't know, any other. Pick an emotion. There's so many good ones. Just go ahead and pick one. Different visual decisions associated with each of those. Are there examples of other games, basically just any other media that have an art style that you think might be appropriate for the game? This is both. This is sort of a multifaceted, or the answer, I think, is sort of multifaceted. So, in one respect, I want to see what the designer or programmer, whomever, sort of what they respond to, because that's just useful to know that, like, oh, hey, I know this person is really into this thing. I can make similar creative decisions and probably have them be excited about those, and that can just sort of make everything a little bit more efficient, a little bit more I don't know, copacetic. But, also I think, in analyzing those other things, I might be able to borrow, nouns and verbs from that visual language. And then also it's sort of a cross check. So if, and really actually a lot of these questions serve as cross checks. If I look at a video or a prototype and I see a certain kind of gameplay, and then, they say, oh, the emotional tone is X. if those two things are different, it allows me to find a new line of questioning, like figuring out why I perceive a gulf there. And just like this, it's just like that, rather, this is a similar thing that, like, if, they say, oh, we want it to be, the emotional tone is like, oh, super upbeat. It's like going to be really, really good. And I think the aesthetic of The Road would be super appropriate. I'll be like, okay, that's not where I would go to first thing. So let's talk about that, right? And then finally, are there any visual issues that you're struggling with right now? Often when people get in touch with me, it's because they have already tried something else and they are sort of ready to bring on an art director proper. And it's just sort of good to also check, like, if there are blockers, it's good to get those blockers removed as soon as possible. And that might be a thing that I do before, I do some of the other stuff that I'll have to do. Okay, so that's that part. Let's actually put on, I've got some other stuff to talk about, but let's just look at a picture first. Let's make that bigger. Boop, 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 boop. I'm not going to really talk about this at all. I just want to give you something to look at. Okay, so, I guess that's weird. I will explain what this is. This is a mock-up of a PC version of a game called Beartopia. The original game was for Google Daydream, which was supported for like a whole 3 months, basically. So no one played it, which is a shame because it was a cool game. And they were like, oh, hey, we should re-release this on PC, but do a refresh of the art. And this was a mock-up for that. Okay, now, like I said, though, that's not really related to anything I want to talk about. It's just good to have something nice to look at while I talk about other stuff. Okay, so each one of those questions, email questions, is important because they help me and the developer build sort of a foundation of like shared understanding on a project. I understand why they're making the thing. I understand what they're making. And like I said, I usually, that question and answer period usually happens before I even sign on to a project. So, if the answers they give are like, oh, this sounds super cool, but I actually think I'd be a bad fit for the project, I usually try and find someone else. That usually doesn't happen. But I say that because there's sort of, even though like me saying, oh, I can't work on this might be considered maybe a bad outcome, I say it to sort of highlight like that information is always useful. And even if you're in the middle of a project, if you've never had those conversations with the rest of your team, if you never shared those ideas, I actually think it's useful to answer those questions, put the answers like in a Google Doc or something like that, because I think you can sort of form pillars or like of values, maybe not really design pillars, but like just sort of like, it's sort of just the broad strokes, right? Like, and then as you're continuing on to, you're making games take a long time to make. Sometimes emergent stuff pops up. It's nice to be able to say like, oh, hey, this emergent thing is really fun. Does it actually like make sense with all these stated reasons that we're making the game? Because sometimes it maybe doesn't make sense or it doesn't jive with those things, but that just means like, oh, hey, we have like an idea to prototype for a future title. It's always fun to put that kind of stuff on the shelf. Okay. Right. So I ask questions, I get answers, and usually, yeah, hey, actually, you know what? We've been looking at this for a while. Let's look at something else. I'm also not going to talk about this. Oh man, it opened up in different view. Let's look at this little scene. Go ahead and explore. Oh, there's a guy. Okay, so this is a mock-up for a thing that Oh, actually, this is for Colors of the Forest, which is now called Cozy Grove and is about to be launched. And I think probably Graham works on this because I think this game is being worked on by most of Spry Fox. Okay. Okay, so I get the answers to my questions, and that's usually when I start working on a mock-up. Now, there are a few goals I have when I'm making mock-ups, but I think the most important one is to figure out the game's like basic visual hierarchy. Now, a visual hierarchy, if you have never heard that term before, it's basically the order in which a viewer or player will see things on screen. So if you have, like, say, a screenshot, really this is true of any, like, it's true of graphic design, it's true of painting, it's true of anything. It's true of 2D compositions. A visual hierarchy is like some stuff is prominent, you see that first, and then there's secondary stuff that you see, and then there's like tertiary stuff that you see after you've been looking at it for a while. But it's just basically the order in which you notice things in the image. The visual hierarchy is really important to nail down because that's sort of what's going to, you're going to build the visual language around that. So, you know, in the case of games, you know, if just for example, let's say you're making a game with a third person character, well, that character is probably, the player character is probably going to be the most important thing on the screen. So you want them to be at the very top of the visual hierarchy, and you make them sit at the top of the hierarchy by making formal art choices, visual choices, to make sure that that character always pops. So that means, you know, the character has a higher level of detail than the background, or the character has more saturated colors than the background, or the character has a greater range of values. So basically more bright brights and dark darks than the background. And then there's the secondary stuff. The secondary stuff wants to pop off the background, but not pop so high that it eclipses the player. So figuring out just the order of those things, that's like the sort of the most important first thing that I do when I'm making a mock-up. Because again, that's doing that initial work. That's where you're going to get your visual language. Okay, let's look at another list of things. So I have a few rules about mock-ups that I think are really, really important. Okay, so first, don't do stuff in a mock-up that I'm not reasonably sure I can do in an engine. There is a temptation, I think, to like just sort of make a mock-up look as absolutely zazzy as you possibly can. But if you make something, and actually I'll back up, there is value in that. But I tend to be a little bit pragmatic, I think, because again, you know, I'm taking the very wide view. I'm trying to look at the whole picture. And if you make a really nice looking mock-up that you actually don't know how to build, all you've really done is make a really beautiful blocker. So I tend to only make decisions in a mock-up that that I either know how to do already, or it's, you know, maybe related to something that I've done before. This usually gets into like stuff with shaders. Like, oh, hey, we can do something like this. I've never done this thing specifically, but I've seen it done in other games, and I've got a very rough idea of how to figure it out. Okay. Be honest with how I'm showing things. So, again, there is a temptation, I think, to place everything in the perfect spot of an image. But that, and that makes a really nice looking image, right? It makes a picture that looks cool, and people say like, oh, wow, yeah, I'd buy that. Awesome. But I think a mock-up, more than being like sizzle art, it's a tool. And you can solve a lot of problems in that image way more efficiently than if you were trying to solve them like in development. So what I mean is, you know what, actually, perfect example. One of the things I'm working on right now is very NDA, but I'm working on mock-ups for it. And without getting into specifics, it is a top-down, it's got a top-down camera angle, and there's a tile-based environment, and there's objects and enemies that occupy those tiles. And there was a temptation to, hey, let's put stuff around this environment so that it just like looks really good. But instead, what I'm doing is stacking things up, putting a lot of objects really close to one another. The levels in this game get generated procedurally. So, you know, I can use this mock-up to figure out how I'm going to handle stuff, you know, like clipping one another, and stuff be sitting in front of, you know, how can I solve all of these visibility issues, basically. It's a really good use of a mock-up, and it's going to be way faster for me to figure that out just in the image than, you know, if we were all in Unity and we were saying, okay, well, let's try this. Okay, now let's try that, right? That stuff can take time. Make sure I'm using the correct camera settings. This is like a really simple thing, but it's also easy to forget. You know, if I know the game, you know, takes place at a overhead camera set to 60 degrees and blah, 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 like that's what I should be using when I'm making my mock-up. Otherwise, you know, you're gonna end up designing things that like, oh, this looks really, really good at like a lower camera angle, but when I look at it up above, you know, we lose a lot of the detail or something like that. You know, you want to make sure that the mock-up is as much as it can be is a fake screenshot. Okay, moving on. This is a really good one. Make two. So one that allows me to figure out the broad strokes of my visual language, which this one doesn't need to show gameplay. And then a second one, which is effectively a fake screenshot. I've got a couple images to show. So this sort of gets back to, where is Love is Dead? Okay, this sort of gets back to my comment earlier about figuring out like a visual hierarchy, and then that becomes my visual language. There was a game that I worked on 3-4 years ago, maybe, called Love is Dead. The developer wanted to refresh the art. This is the game as it existed when they got in touch with me. The game itself is a puzzle game. It's got a really sweet narrative. It had a ton of heart, but the art was fine, but they wanted it to be just punchier and sort of more welcoming. So ignore this down here. This was just me sort of cataloging the colors in the scene. So the very first thing I did was, actually, I can leave that open. The very first thing I did was this little vignette. So, you know, the nouns and verbs of gameplay. Really, I guess it's just that there are no verbs in this. It's just nouns, but it's one of the characters. There's a little zombie, some miscellaneous scenery stuff. Basically just, and this actually started out, the very first thing I did was I did like a little speed painting with just big splotches of color that was effectively exactly this image. And then I built this in Unity. But again, it's just sort of like figuring out, okay, how is this going to work? You know, in this particular case, the character is has a higher saturation than the background. We have this gradient, a gradient background instead of a flat background, which, you know, the original was. And that's sort of just to, it sort of uses muted colors that you find in the environment art. So it sort of hey, here's the background. It just sort of sets a base. It's like a wash across the whole scene. And then the environment art sort of sets the kind of core palette. And then because of saturation and also gradient, this is a very bright color. This is a very dark color. And we don't use a gradient on other stuff, only on the kind of core nouns of gameplay. These things sort of pop forward. Looking at this, it's funny, looking at this image now, I think those leaves are way too bright. They're basically the same saturation of the character. I should have dropped those back. I thought that yesterday when I was looking, but it's still, I think it stands. Here are the broad strokes. And then from there, I went and made this, which is, more or less a copy of the previous mockup. Or the previous screenshot. Okay. So let me go back to my text. So actually, we can keep this up while I finish this thought. The reason I think this is good is because it sort of breaks down a lot of work into smaller pieces. Just like, making a whole game takes so much time and is so difficult that if you only celebrate the victory of shipping, it means you are probably miserable for like 18 months. It's good to break those problems down and have like little mini celebrations along the way. It's also just good to break things down because complex problems are like, they're hard by nature. They're hard. And it's good to just give yourself a little bit more bite-sized chunks of challenge. This makes things just move along a little bit more efficiently. So I always do the 2 mock-ups now at this point. Oh man, I totally forgot about this little Pac-Man ghost. That dude's cool. Okay, sorry. I'll try not to hurt my wrist from patting myself on the backs too hard. Okay, here's more here's more mock-up stuff. Okay. Try to answer all the questions in the work. So if I look at a piece of work that I've done, if I look at a mock-up, and this is actually also true of just concept work in general. If I'm able to look at something and then immediately think, I bet they're going to ask about this detail, or I bet they're going to ask about how this thing works. It's good if I have an answer for that to like say to them, but it's actually better for me to just go and address that question in the work, because that means that thing on screen is not clear enough. It should be answering its own questions. This is not always possible, but I think it's the thing that you want to shoot for. Right. So being mindful of the fact that the mock-up is going to dictate like the rest of production. So again, there's the temptation to just make something look as cool as possible, but it sort of gets back to the point I made, the question of like, what's your schedule? Because figuring out an art style that will comfortably fit in 6 months, there are different decisions that I'm going to make. This, going back to Love is Dead, I feel like one of the stipulations was that the refresh shouldn't take too much time, which really is the refresh shouldn't cost that much money. So all of this screen here, it doesn't use anything. There isn't anything fancy. This is just stock Unity lighting. We have one little thing that actually didn't even end up getting used. It was the glow around the characters to make them pop more, and that ended up not even being needed. But this is this scene represents like really basic modeling. All the models were unwrapped to like a single like palette texture, so you didn't actually have to really unwrap anything. It was just grabbing the UVs for like whole chunks and just shrinking them down to fit in a little palette square. And that was all done intentionally, right? Because that type of stuff, like, oh, hey, we can chop out whole parts of a traditional pipeline, and that's better for the production schedule, and that's better for the budget. And this is true of any game that you work on, right? Like, it's anything you make in a mock-up is like, okay, well, that's going to be, you know, if we approach the characters like this, or we try and achieve this level of detail, like, congratulations, you just added 8 months onto the project. There's a this is a quick sidebar, but it's related. There's a documentary, not really, it's like a marketing puff piece disguised as a documentary, basically, that came out a few years ago. It was about the Ford Mustang. I listen to a lot of documentaries when I'm working. They're like podcasts, but you learn stuff. Okay. So they're talking about, there's this one scene where they're talking about needing to change a screw. It, like a single screw to, like, you know, tie something down in the engine or whatever. I don't know what the hell the screw is used for. It doesn't matter. Not the point. So they're like, oh, hey, we have to change the screw. It costs 6 cents. But looking forward to, like, how that affects production, it was like a difference of, like, oh, it's $20 million or something like that for just this 1 6-cent screw. Every single decision you make in a mock-up is like that, you know. And as I'm working now, I can sort of feel like, as I'm making decisions, like, oh, I feel the budget getting bigger right now. I feel me taking more time on production, or I feel less. So that's a good thing to just always keep in mind. Basically, high level, you know, I sort of said it, but it bears repeating. Like, the goal of a mock-up isn't just to make an attractive piece of art that the team can get behind. It's to solve problems. It's to mitigate risk. So I tend to like to be thorough. In general, I like having a really robust pre-production period, because I have discovered that, man, you know, an extra week on pre-production can save, I don't know, a month, who knows how much time in production. And that's always good. Okay. So I'm going to just now show some mock-ups and talk about that stuff. Actually, I should head over to Twitch to see if, okay, good. No questions. That's what I was just checking on. Okay, so now we're gonna look at just some stuff. This was a mock-up for, oh my God, Crush the Castle. I forgot the name. Crush the Castle, which was Armor Games Studio. It was a franchise made by them. It was originally a web game and then a 2D mobile game, but they wanted to do a new version of it that was 3D. This is out. This came out maybe 2 years ago, about that. But this was the first mock-up that I did. So, and I actually started, I should have pulled that image too. I started with a little vignette. But the thing that was immediately obvious from the original games is that it was really interesting and really fun to see these big, tall structures crash down. And so I wanted to emphasize, like, chunkiness with the art style. I wanted to feel really, I don't know, just like these really formidable, chunky structures, all like collapse, big chunky bricks going everywhere. And so, you know, big, chunky, kind of wonky though, right? They don't look, they're these big chunky things, but they don't really look structurally sound. They look like you can tip them over, or, you know, shoot a catapult at them and knock them over. And so then also, just like the Love is Dead stuff, stock lighting, nothing too fancy. This is a mobile game, so fancy is in a lot of ways out of the question anyway. Or at least, you know, relative to doing something for, I don't know, PlayStation or whatever. So, you know, stock stuff, really sort of ultimately simple forms, simple textures. Simple textures help things read on a small screen. You know, if you're looking at something on your phone, you don't want a bunch of detail in the texture. It'll just get muddy. So this helps everything be nice and poppy, but it also, again, be fast to make. Okay. Monsters Expedition. This was one of the, my most recently launched game. It's a very awesome puzzle game, and you should definitely check it out. Not just because it gives me money, but because I think it's truly an awesome game. So these were the original mock-ups I did for those. In the game, you it's an open world puzzle game. So you land on these islands, and you have to push trees over and kind of roll them around, manipulate them to create bridges to the next island. And it's, like I said, it's open world. So, you know, your path through the world is going to be different than other people's paths. The original version of the game, in the original version, when you knock down the trees on an island, it was supposed to go from like a summer look to like a fall look. Basically, there's like a seasonal change that tied into like the narrative. The game ended up scrapping that narrative halfway through, and we went with something else. So that is no longer in the game. But still, that was one of the big nouns of gameplay. You know, other nouns is just you know, the trees. These objects were blockers, so those had to sit in the visual hierarchy. Those had to sit above the terrain. So again, just like in a previous example, these terrain tiles are sort of like a middle saturation and value, and then the stuff that sits on top of them, the trees, the blockers, you know, more saturated colors, more contrast in general, and then the delineation between water and land is super pronounced, both because of color choices and also because we always have a like uniform bit of shoreline visible. So that's how I work through that one. And then if we look at, where are you? So this is the final game, and you can see a lot of this stuff is was maintained. This was one of the smoothest productions that I've ever encountered, and I've been doing this for 16 years. So that was really nice. Oh my God, what a shitty screenshot though. The flowers are in the water. Oh, I can't believe I never noticed that. And we're recording this too. Great. Okay, well, I bet if I go through the game now, there's flowers in the water all over the place, and I'm just a terrible art director that I never noticed. Okay, I don't think that's true. Okay, let's keep going. Let's look at Tooth and Tail. So Tooth and Tail was a sort of action, or I should say arcade real-time strategy game that came out in 2017, I believe it was. It's very fast to play. It's there is a campaign, but it was designed as a multiplayer game, and matches take between 5 and 10 minutes. It's sort of like Mario Kart as a RTS. So this was actually not the first. The first mock-up was not pixel art. After I had done the first mock-up, the studio head at that studio said, "Hey, I actually always imagined this as a pixel art game. Do you think you could try that?" And we went to that. But here, you know, it's a similar thing. This is actually a lot of these things. A lot of these games use a very similar visual hierarchy, where like, hey, the background is going to be sort of like a middle saturation, middle tone. Stuff that sits on top of it is going to have more contrast or more saturated colors. This particular game, the mock-up also had to solve some of those visibility issues that the just like the game I'm working on right now. in the previous version, cliffs could block terrain tiles. If I could have a grid here on this particular mock-up, though, one of the things I did was treating, basically finding the right angle for the slope, that this back tile is actually never occluded. The line would be like basically right here. And so we were able to just like totally mitigate that problem just in the mock-up. Geez, I'm trying to think of other stuff in this one, but I don't think there is. I think this big one was just like, hey, oh, actually, this little sort of dugout. This was another question that we had, was like, oh, faking that depth, is that going to look weird just in the scene? And is it going to look weird when creatures go over it? And I demonstrated, no, see, I can, in Photoshop, I was just screen sharing, but no, see, I can drag him and it looks fine. So one of the other benefits of being honest and not doing stuff that's like going to be really hard to produce later on is that your mock-up can basically evolve and just become production assets. And that's exactly what happened on this game. So, oh my God, is that actually the size of this image? That can't be right. Hold on. Enhance. Okay, good. That's still pretty small. Enhance. So this went through, this is just iteration in this mock-up, but it sort of just became this living document. I remember, we were playing around with different, what would day-night cycle stuff look like. This was the original one that we just saw. This was, hey, how about water? This was, okay, let's get some characters in there and some VFX stuff. And hey, so the game takes place sort of like in a World War II, or rather World War I setting. So we had this trench. We didn't end up doing trenches. Oh, and this actually was a new version of this, because for a while there was discussion about, maybe we should keep things mostly flat. So we just had the ladder going down. Different environment type. Let's get away from grass. Was a different environment type look like? Here's he painting a bunch of little animals. So in case you don't know, it's about animals, factions of animals fighting one another with the intention of eating the defeated. The victors will eat the defeated. It's sort of a grisly, it looks kind of cute, but it's sort of a grisly game. This is working on a design for this windmill, which then became this one. Oh, and I've got a sweet little artillery hit right here. This is, just more stuff, more structures, more animals and stuff. And then, so that was still part of the mock-up process. But then we come here, and this is just a file from production. So once we were in the production and we were just painting assets, like this is it. And for all intents and purposes, this is what the game looked like. Except in the game, we also had some sort of nice faked lighting shaders and stuff like that, which actually is the next boop. This is the actual game. So you can see, with the exception of, obviously the lighting and the reflection in the water certainly adds a lot, but as far as the assets go, it really is one-to-one. Okay. And then, oh, right. I guess that's that. Hey, let's just look at this one last image while I finish up my thoughts. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about feedback. Actually, what time is it? Oh, yeah, we're good. Okay. So, you do a mock-up, and now it's time for, a designer or a programmer or whomever to give feedback on it and talk about it. Giving feedback can sometimes feel uncomfortable, but there's a few guidelines I think are useful to keep in mind. First and foremost, I know it's hard if this is not a thing you usually do, but don't be bashful. In art school, I think probably just about any formal art education, one of the very first things you learn is that critique isn't a put down. You're talking about the work, you're not talking about the person, and perfection is an impossibility. There's always something to improve. So as long as you're, polite and you're constructive, you should feel free to just speak freely. So let's talk about how to be constructive. Oh, actually, these are illustrations from a game that never came out, just so you know, just to give that context. I love this guy. Look at this guy. He's great. Okay. So let's talk about how to be constructive. I think it's good to avoid subjective language. So what I mean by that is, if you're looking at a character concept, if I show you these character concepts and you're like, I don't think this green guy looks cool enough, that can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I mean, that guy doesn't look cool enough. That's sort of a dumb example because, it's clear I'm not going for cool on this one. But even it's like, oh, hey, some guy in a, I don't know, hoodie with a backpack, and he's a guy who's skateboarding. I don't know, whatever. Just imagine that this guy is skateboarding. That's actually cool. Skateboarding goblins. Good free game idea. And you say, okay, he doesn't look cool enough. Well, my interpretation of cool and your interpretation of cool are probably different, maybe wildly so. So I think it's good to, instead of saying stuff like that, try to analyze exactly what's wrong. So a good question to ask yourself is, what does the game's design need the art to say? And then the follow-up is, what is the art actually saying? Very early in my career, actually my first year in the industry, I was working on a game. It was a Xbox XBLA launch title for the 360 called Marble Blast Ultra. It was basically 3D Marble Madness. And I was making power-ups. In the game, you can roll your marble around and collect little power-ups that allow you to perform different physical feats. One that makes you jump really high, another one that gives you like a quick burst of speed, one that makes you fly for a short time. And I had made the power-up for speed, and one of the bits of feedback I got, I can't remember from who, but I want to say it was from like maybe someone higher up on the project, because I actually spent time thinking about it instead of ignoring it. When I was a 22-year-old, I was not as into listening as I am now. So, so this person said, that's not pointy enough about my speed power up. But it was a rocket. And it was sort of a roly-poly rocket. And he said, that's not pointy enough. And I was like, what? Make it more pointy. And I was like, why? I didn't understand not pointy enough. And after we went back and forth a little bit, I realized what he was actually saying was, it doesn't look fast. That power-up pickup doesn't look fast. It's sort of roly-poly. And so the communication that thing is doing is incorrect. It's supposed to be saying, hey, I'm fast, and it looks cute instead. And that's sort of like, hey, this doesn't look cool enough, right? Or this doesn't look, I don't know, whatever. Dive down and try and figure it out. One thing, if you can't do that, another thing that's sort of good is to try and speak to it in from a more emotional place. So like, because sometimes you want to give feedback, but it's like a gut thing. It's not really anything that you can like reason out. So it's, I don't know, I could show this image right here maybe, and you're like, oh, that's cool, but make it 25% more Bruce Willis from Die Hard or whatever. Or I don't know, hey, this sci-fi gadget needs to have the same vibe as like old rabbit ear antenna TV, you know, stuff like that. Like just playing the, you know, like it, in the case of like, oh, more Bruce Willis, it's not literally make this look like Bruce Willis. It's what's the vibe? What's that emotional thread that we can pull and weave into our own tapestry? And I think if that kind of stuff fails, I think that stuff is actually usually useful and also easy to do. But even if that fails, like, I think it's useful to try to just like get through it as stupidly as you can. Like, don't, this is broad, but it's, I think, a really important lesson. And that is to just learn to be a good non-judgmental listener. That, you know, I guess I spoke to that a little bit when I was starting out. I was not as good a listener. But I have learned that just being a good listener can, I don't know, solve a lot of problems before they're problems. No one likes feeling stupid, right? And so people will often be apprehensive to say something, especially to someone from a different discipline, if they're worried about coming off as stupid. But you know, I sort of always encourage everybody to just like, hey, you don't have to know the lingo. Stumble through it as best you can, and we can figure it out. This maybe gets a little bit into like, say, company culture or like project culture. But it is so beneficial to build a team and build a studio that has a nurturing culture, because, you know, again, it lets you talk about the work freely. Everybody feels respected. Nobody's going to take offense because everybody feels respected. And I don't know, that's the springboard that lets you, you know, jump over the hurdles of communication, I think, more than anything else. Okay. So that is my prepared remarks, but I am definitely excited to answer any questions you have, and I'll actually stop sharing my screen now. Answer any questions you have about specifics, because like I started, like, so much of this topic can be covered in specifics. Oh, there is a question. Out of curiosity, have you ever found that art has to step up its fidelity as technology is improved in devices? And has this caused more demand from devs to artists for less stylized art? I have not personally found that to be true, because, like, for example, this is a good question. Art in general is like as old as human civilization, and a lot of the stuff, like the stuff that you learn in art school, for example, it's like goes back to ancient Greece or earlier. You know, really from all eras, there's stuff to learn about, and stylized stuff and high fidelity stuff, they're ultimately rooted in all of these different historical art traditions. And so you can have, I have personally found that, yes, there are personal tastes. People like, oh, I really like it when games look real, or I really like cute art or whatever. But I think this is such an oversimplification with huge air quotes, but well-made art that is like firmly rooted in timeless art fundamentals always looks good and will always sort of get like a positive response from people. And whether or not you choose to do something that's higher fidelity or more stylized ultimately comes down to what is going to allow you to speak to the game's core design, those core nouns and verbs, the core emotional thread that the game is weaving. That's where that decision is made, is how to best speak to that stuff. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about choosing an art style. I know like some games lean on that very heavily as a marketing angle or like a selling point. Like I know the Chinese Room talked about this for de-rester.
Sure.
Yeah. How do you reconcile that with like, you know, production issues and, you know, setting the right tone and all of these like factors that go into your decision making?
So basically the question is, wait, ask the question again, Brent. I'm not sure I followed it.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm getting at, and you sort of just talked about this a little bit, but there's a lot of factors that go into choosing an art style.
Okay.
More than just like telling the right story or
right.
setting the right mood and sort of how do you reconcile all of that and make a decision?
Right. I mean, broadly speaking, it's a balancing act. And it's also something you talk to 10 different art directors, they're going to give you 10 different answers probably. Because I think part of it is sort of like you need to play to the team's strengths. And, you know, for example, the main gig I have right now, there are 2 incredible painters already employed. They're the primary artists of the thing, and I have been able to lean on them tremendously in ways that it's sort of a unique experience in my career. So, you know, if a studio is known for, hey, we have these wildly rich visual experience as part of the game, or we have to shoot for utter fidelity or something like that. It's sort of just like another circle in a Venn diagram. And it's just trying to find that sweet spot. You're going to compromise across the board. Every other circle is going to be compromised. That is the nature of like picking that art style, but it's just trying to find that sweet spot that like you have enough of everything. That at very least you're confident to move forward, because once you start, you don't want to change, right? That would be so expensive. So I don't know. It's a balancing act. That's such a good question, but it sort of changes project to project and team to team, I think.
And we have a question from Cake. Hi Adam, thanks so much for your time. Cake. There are some things programmers can do to make your life easier and development process let me start that again. What are some things programmers can do to make your life easier and the development process as smooth as possible?
What a lovely question, and thank you for that consideration. I appreciate it. Geez, what are some things? Oh man, I'm not used to asking that or being asked that question. It's usually me asking that question.
Would you consider pipeline stuff in the purview of programmers or artists? Because I feel like that's a really good question too. That's sort of a different question. Oh, man, I'm going to talk about that one later because I've got a lot to say about pipelines. I guess just don't be bashful. I think that's the big thing. Like, don't be bashful and don't be too deferential. I've been on, I guess it's really tied into being bashful. I've been on projects before where, we're doing the work, we're doing concept work, we're making mock-ups and stuff like that. And the developer is like, yep, looks good. You're the artist. Whenever I hear the phrase, you're the artist, it's like, that means you don't like it, but you don't want to say it. Like, just go ahead and say it. I'm not going to be mad. I'm here to make your game for you. Like,
if you're not happy, that means we both fucked up. Like, so, yeah, just don't be bashful. That's I think probably the best thing. And then as far as like maybe practical stuff goes, here's a good thing. It's usually good if your prototype is like reasonably put together. If you get in touch with me and your prototype is like super bare bones and you're doing a lot of hand waving, like, oh, this will be cool later. Like, I mean, I've been on projects like that before. That's the nature of this thing that we're doing. But if you show me a prototype and I start making a mock-up for it, that mock-up is going to assume the nouns and verbs of gameplay are the ones. If you change those nouns and verbs, it means the nouns and verbs of the art style are no longer relevant. So it can mean that we have to do a lot of stuff over again, which maybe isn't a problem, but generally budgets are not infinite, and that means time and money that we could be spending on other stuff. So I think that's more just like more than like making my life easier. It's sort of in a roundabout way making your own life easier by just being thorough, I guess, and making sure that you're reasonably confident in what you've made. Can I be your intern? I used to have interns all the time. When I was teaching, I would have interns all the time. And now there is an intern who is now a generalist and tech artist at Spryfox. So probably not. But actually, if you're an artist and you want to send me a portfolio, go ahead and send me a portfolio. Chickadee at Chickadee Games. What's maybe more likely than an intern is, if you're looking for feedback, I'll very happily give feedback. And if your work is good, I'll be like, oh, okay, so sweet. I subcontract stuff all the time. And congratulations, you're now on my list of people that I will reach out to if I need that work done. Any advice on the designer working the artist on more functional components such as callouts? I'm not sure I understand that question, War Dog. If you can ask it in a different way, I'd be pumped to give you an answer.
While they're typing that, I'm curious, like, how maybe this is kind of what they're getting at, but how do you integrate into the design process? Because I know art can be part of a game's design.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good question. This is maybe another one of those things you ask different people, they give different answers. The way I approach this, and that's just because Chickadee is a visual design and art production studio that services designers and programmers, is I don't the people who get in touch with me aren't people who are trying to make games that have like heavy art aspect to the design, because usually if they're prototyping that, they probably have an artist on staff already. So I think the thing that in my own experience it's probably happens a little bit more is I'm really big on having a strong emotional thread that runs through the whole thing. And so in that regard, I like having a lot of conversations about like really hammering on some of those questions I talked about earlier, like what inspired this, what's the emotional content of it, and just having like long conversations, basically long, deep conversations. Playing, oh, that makes me think of this. Oh, that reminds me of something that happened way back when, blah, blah, blah. Because like action items and stuff are, hey, check it out, it's my cat back there. it's good to have like task lists and stuff like that, but I think it's also good to have like a firm understanding of like the gestalt of what you're making, you know, that sort of like, you know, je ne sais quoi of the thing, and those things are maybe hard to define, but you can feel it, and that's, I think, maybe more of something that I would like bring to the table that another art director might not. I don't know.
Looks like War Dog has elaborated specifically on like moments where you need to call out a certain thing in the game.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so like, I mean, that gets down to like the visual hierarchy stuff, right? So, right, this is sort of just like functional art fundamentals. You know, typically if something has, I was just tempted to just crack Photoshop open and like, oh, here, I'll just quickly draw it out, but that'll take 30 minutes at least. Okay, so yeah, if colors are more, so saturation is one way that stuff can pop off of another thing. Low saturation colors, well, okay, actually, let me back up. Stuff pops off of a background when it looks different than the background. And there's a lot of different ways that you can make something look different. So, you know, color, I love color, as is probably evident in my work. That's a thing that I deal with a lot. But it's not the only way. So let's talk about a different way. If a background is like really dense with detail, but then let's just say a character is relatively simple. Let's say the character is just like basically a big circle with legs or something, big roly-poly guy, maybe not even facial features, he's just a big round monster. Walking around on top of like, I don't know, field of trash, lots of detail everywhere, super high frequency detail. That monster is going to pop off because it has less detail. If the background is super muted colors, almost grayscale, but let's just say that monster is bright red, that bright red is going to make that character pop, the bright saturation. If, let's say you're looking at like a field of snow or a desert or some other environment that's, you know, relatively detail less. And let's actually just say snow. We're in New England. That's appropriate. A big field of snow, freshly fallen, not disturbed. And you put a character on top of that. And let's say the whole thing is grayscale. Well, just the fact that that character, even if that character is just like 4 lines, 4 dark lines, those lines are going to pop because there's nothing else there. So it's really just about contrast. If you want to learn more about this stuff, this is just like the elements of 2D design. You can actually look that up. You'll get tons of hits. And basic composition. This is the stuff that you learn your first year in art school. So there's going to be just like lots of good stuff. It's all just like art fundamentals. And you can probably actually find on YouTube, now that I'm thinking about it, I've never looked because I paid thousands of dollars to learn this instead of being smart and just going on YouTube. But if you hit YouTube and say the elements of 2D design, there's probably like, I don't know, a dozen awesome 15-minute explainers that would give you my first year of college. So yeah, try that.
Hey, Adam, sort of you alluded to this before and Graham brought it up. I'm wondering about, as an art director, how much knowledge you need of platform considerations ahead of time, whether it's pipelines, you know, or like say you're making this like this PC VR thing. Oh, but you know, and then it's like, oh, it has to run on Oculus Quest, or it's gonna have to run on Switch or whatever. Like, how much coordination, how much knowledge do you need to have ahead of time of target platforms, and how does that influence your art direction for render pipelines, and also like, have you ever been sort of taken off guard where you have to port to like a totally unsupported or unconsidered platform or pipeline?
So Elliot, I'm so happy you asked that question, because I realized as I was talking that I left off a question that I always ask in the beginning, and it's, what is the platform? Because that is that's huge. Like, obviously, I mean, like you said, if you're shooting for one and then like, oh, hey, we also want this on mobile, it's like, well, shit. Okay. I tend to, so Monsters Expedition is actually a really good example. That was an Apple Arcade title. But we also knew that we were going to put it out on PC, and we wanted to put it on consoles as well. There was no deal in place for consoles, but that was the thing we wanted. So I personally tend to like to, in a case like that, I like to design an art style. I sort of design for mobile, but try and do it in a way that it's going to also just look good on PC. People won't know that. This is so funny because this actually sort of ties back to the question in chat about fidelity and stuff. And I think, let's just try and make good, fundamental decisions that are going to look good anywhere, because it's just good, just kind of good art. And but considering the technology is critical, just because again, like with a mock-up and stuff, you're not just making a pretty picture, you're creating a map. And if you made a map that it's like, oh, okay, cool, we're gonna need a Ferrari to do this, and it's like, well, you got a station wagon, bro. Like, you have to be considering the tools that you have, and that's the platform. So have I ever been caught off guard? Not really, but kind of. So when we were working on Beartopia, the Google Daydream title, that was my first VR title, but because it was a launch title for new hardware, I was working on that game for I think 4 months before I ever actually had the hardware and could actually check stuff. And I mean, you've done so much VR, that making art for VR is different than making something that's going to be on a 2D screen. And I tried to do my due diligence and do research, and I had read like, oh, all of your texture tricks are not going to work in VR. It feels like wallpaper that's been plastered. And I thought like, okay, go light on the texture tricks. No, you can't use them at all. And so I had done like I said, 4 months of work, and then when I finally got the hardware, I looked at it and I said, oh shit, I've got to redo so much of this. And that was sort of like making something for a new platform is always hard. It doesn't matter what, console or VR, it doesn't matter what it is. It's always that sort of experience. But it, in a lot of ways, felt like all of the decisions I'd been making up to that point were based on incorrect assumptions. And that was a total surprise. And that was actually one of the reasons I was really excited about the possibility of re-releasing that game with new art, is because the art that we shipped with was fine, but it was just such a compromised, the whole project was just sort of a messy project in a lot of ways. But I was excited, like, oh cool, I get a redo. And then it never materialized, so I was sort of bummed.
We did have a question from Durian asking how to give proper feedback for an art concept mock-up as a non-artist. You covered this in your talk. I don't know if you can expand on that.
I can expand on it. I think for, concept art. Okay, so really, I think the key couple questions to ask yourself is, again, what does the game's design need this thing to say? And is the art currently saying that? And if it's not saying that, just saying, really using that phrase exactly, the art needs to say this, but instead it's saying, I feel like it's saying that. And there's maybe some discussion to have there of like, again, it sort of gets into the thing like, oh, it doesn't look cool enough. Like, even if you're trying to be articulate, there's going to be some, you're going to have to suss out exactly like what you mean and where their head was when they were trying to make it. And, but I do think that set of questions is sort of like the king of questions, and everything else sort of derives from that. I think, and I think there's maybe different versions of that question. It needs to say this can also be, oh, it needs to feel like this. This character is supposed to be a calming presence in the game, but right now they look sort of cold and calculating, and that's the wrong vibe. I think when things are wrong, it's usually just that it's saying the wrong thing. That's been my experience anyway. So approaching it from that angle is usually good. And again, it's maybe not even something that you have to like vocalize. You can say, oh, like that's a cool concept. Here's another concept, or here's a character from a movie, or here's whatever that like, this isn't exactly what we want, but the vibe is closer. And that can also sometimes just be enough to be like, oh, okay, I get it. No more words need to be said. I get it. So, yeah, that's it. That's my answer. Speaking generally, do you have an average turnaround time a dev should expect for a game-ready model? So this is really funny. This was 2 years ago. Elliot and I were both talking at a little round table, and we both said 4 hours. Like most models take 4 hours. It's just like this weird magic number. Once you hit a certain level, it's just like, yeah, it's model it. Sure, it's about 4 hours. It's an afternoon. Okay, so let's actually a piece of. Okay, so just speaking generally. I mean, the model thing is. It depends on what it is, right? It depends on what it is and also the detail level. Like, like I said, I tend to favor things that are going to be reasonably quick to produce. And so that means, I'm not taking time to like sculpt a model. Sculpting is like a whole extra set of steps, so it's going to make me take longer. Like if you talk about like AAA production times, it's like, oh, people are working on one thing for a week or 2 weeks or a month, whereas the art styles I usually design, it's like, oh, a character is going to take an afternoon. I don't know, it all comes down to detail level. A piece of concept art, that's a little bit more general across the board. You don't really get into like huge differences between, or actually, no, I'm going to totally walk that back. So concept art is like sort of a broad thing. There are different kinds of concept art. If you're talking about just like a speed painting, like that's, I don't know, an hour less. If you're talking about just like a bunch of thumbnail sketches for, any given thing, this sort of gets into like a process. Like your question is, how much does it take to do this one thing? But really all of these things are part of a bigger process. If we're talking about like concepting a character, for instance, we would start with just a bunch of thumbnail drawings. Thumbnail drawings I usually cap it at 10 minutes, but really I say 5 minutes. If I'm art directing somebody else and I say I want thumbnails, don't spend more than 5 minutes on any drawing. They're really, really fast. It's just to capture like the broad forms. Oh, here's this really big guy. Here he looks with a triangle body like this. Here he looks with a triangle body like that. This is a stupid thing. I didn't have to make that with my hands. And then like, okay, cool. I like this one, and this one. Mash these two together. Try and find the middle point between these four. And you go back and do that iteration. That initial version of Monsters Expedition had a character, and we had, by the end of it, maybe 11 pages of concept drawings where there was between 20 and 30 drawings on each page. And that was the process for that one character. That probably took between 1 and 2 weeks. But then there's also times when it's like you draw for an afternoon and you get it. So it's all part of a process. Yeah.
I had a question about art changes for increased awareness of different types of accessibility requirements. So having done a lot of web development, there's been a lot more awareness over the years of variants of color blindness and things like that. Have you had any sort of feedback specifically to any of the art that you've worked on, or do you have any sort of guidance for people on how to approach accessible design for games?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So funny enough, on Monsters Expedition, I cannot remember how I met him. I met a guy named Jason. I don't remember his last name. But he's got a condition with his vision that I don't remember, but it basically amounted to like extreme color blindness, to the point that like a red health bar on top of a black background those two things were indistinguishable. So he couldn't actually see health going down in most games. And so he was basically a consultant for me. I sent him screenshots of the game and I said, hey, how does this look? What's not readable? And he, thankfully, actually, the way I'd constructed sort of like the format of, how the objects, like the value range of the objects versus the terrain versus the character, everything was sort of sitting well already, because he could see value, he could see brights versus darks. So that was awesome. But geez, I don't know if I have any advice other than like, just like do some research and reach out to people who know about it, because it's just like it's so important. And like it's so like, I think before there was just generally not an awareness, a cultural awareness of it, and so you could maybe be more easily forgiven for not considering it. But I don't know. I travel in pretty considerate circles, so maybe it just seems to me like it's everywhere, but it seems like that stuff is everywhere. So I think it's just just do research and reach out. I would actually you probably know of all sorts of resources of like, oh, hey, here's a website and it lists, here's the stuff that you have to consider. Like, I don't know. I would love to know if something like that existed.
I'll plug a resource I know about, which is the Game Maker's Toolkit YouTube channel.
They
have a Designing for Disability.
I had no idea. Series. That's an awesome channel too.
Yeah, it's really, really great because they go through like color blindness, for example. They go through like all the different kinds of color blindness and what you need to consider, and talk about tools and all sorts of things like that.
That's killer.
But yeah, I think you're absolutely right though, that the best thing you can do is to reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, we have one last war dog question. Once a designer has blocked out a level, what is your next step for the first art pass? Do you do a paint over, or are there other techniques?
I usually do. That's a good question. I usually. Oh, geez. You know, it probably depends on what the game is and the camera viewpoint and just all kinds of stuff. I think paint overs are like a super useful thing. Even like I would say actually most of the concept art I do is never seen by anybody but me, because it really is just like, I'm going to quickly scribble this, or I'm going to throw some paint around and blah, blah, blah. And then I'll like do the work that I feel comfortable showing other people. But so paint overs, that is definitely something that's just part of my standard toolkit. You know, yeah, probably if something's already been blocked out, that is what I would do. Because I'm thinking about it right now in the like space of just like totally vague, you know, generally what would you do? It's like, I'd probably do a paint over. I can't think of what else I would do. But in a, I'm sure though that there are like, oh, hey, given the circumstances of this particular thing, what I would actually do is this, but I'm not imagining those weird circumstances right now.
Cool. Well, thank you, Adam, for all of this. It's been awesome.
2 thumbs up. Quite
Yes.
welcome.
Absolutely
Pat yourself
fantastic. Yeah. Alrighty, we have. I guess before we go, we have the giveaway ticket for the JetBrains licenses.
Yeah.
Graham, do you wanna?
Sure. Yeah. I think we were sort of debating what we should do, and I think the easiest thing we could do is just. Adam's worked on a lot of awesome games. Just throw it in the chat, and the first 4 people to throw in the correct answer get the license.
Quickly go to my website.
Yeah.
My ludography is right there. You can just
Several
pick
of them
one.
have been mentioned in this talk. If you were paying
Yeah,
attention,
exactly.
you probably got to
Yeah, that's
remember
right.
which ones they were. So, type in the names of any of the games you saw tonight.
Okay, good.
Cake.
And you can type in duplicates too, so you could type in Monstrous Expedition.
No duplicates. That's my
No
rule.
duplicates. Oh, wow, okay.
Unique names.
4 uniques.
Ideally for you. I mean, you know, we may have to.
I'm just kidding. You can all say.
Oh,
Castle Crusher, close. The judges will accept that.
That's That's good enough.
that is. Yep.
Detail.
Yep.
Castle Crash.
Castle Crash? Oh no.
I wish I worked on that, but I did not.
So that is one as a duplicate. That's fine, right?
Yes.
We
that's
said
the-
duplicates were allowed. So okay, we're good. We're good. Thank you guys.
Oh, Steambirds Alliance. Hey, I didn't even mention that one.
Well,
Good.
there you go.
Damn.
Okay, that's uniques. So that we've got 4 definite winners. Alrighty. So Graham has posted in chat previously. Can each of the winners message Graham in chat? The other way to reach us is on the meetup page for this. You can send us a message on the meetup page, and we'll have a look for your emails on there. We just basically need to know an email address to send you your license key. So congratulations to our winners. And I guess that brings us to the end. I'm glad that we only had one crash. That was a little hair raising. There's going to be me going through all the Windows logs later on, figuring out what on earth it is that is causing my problems. I am going to suspect.
During the downtime, Elliot did mention this. Is this our first crash ever? And it is. So
It is.
Good on you, Chris, for getting us this far without a fail.
Yeah. Now I've got to figure out what on earth is causing this instability. Okay. Alrighty, guys. Thank you very much, Adam. That was a fabulous talk.
Yeah.
Quite welcome. Thank you.
Really good presentation. That is February. March, we have...
Yeah, we have Eric Robinson talking about something. Maybe choreographer,
Something.
maybe something else. We're not really sure yet.
Probably audio related.
Something probably audio related, yes.
That's
So it should be
awesome.
good.
All right. Okay, thank you everybody for tuning in today, and we hope to see you again next month. And take care. Have a good day.
See you later.
Bye.